November 16th, 1957, Plainfield, Wisconsin. At around 5 p.m., Deputy Sheriff Frank Warden comes to see his mother Bernice, who is a local hardware store owner. When he enters the building, he notices that the cash register is open and his mother is nowhere to be found. He looks down and sees something absolutely traumatic and horrific. The floor is covered with blood. But what happened here? Where was his mother? Who could have possibly wanted to harm her? Was she still alive? Perhaps all of those questions crossed Frank's mind. But in midst of this nightmare, he suddenly remembers something. Last evening, there was this man who visited the store. He said that he would return the next morning to get a gallon of antifreeze. The name of this man was Ed Gein. Frank informed the investigators about the person who he believed was responsible for his mother's disappearance, and on the same day, Gein was arrested. Ed's farm was searched, and unfortunately, Frank Warden's suspicions turned out to be true. A sheriff found Bernice's decapitated body in Gein's shed. She was hung upside down her legs, and her torso was dressed out like a deer. The authorities continued to search the killer's house, and what they found was extremely disturbing. Next to countless other female body parts, they eventually found Bernice Warden's head in a burlap sack. Apparently, Gein shot her with a .22 caliber rifle and brutally mutilated her body afterwards. But what could have possibly made Gein commit those atrocious crimes? Why did this man become such a brutal monster that took the lives of innocent people? In this video, we'll take a closer look at the life of the butcher of Plainfield, Ed Gein. Edward Theodore Gein was born on August 27, 1906 in La Crosse, Wisconsin. He was the son of George Philip Gein, a man who battled alcoholism and struggled to keep his various jobs. But the most influential person in young Edward's life was his mother Augusta Gein. She absolutely despised her husband, and so the atmosphere at home was anything but harmonious. Augusta made sure that she would raise her sons Edward and Henry properly, but unfortunately, she had her own bizarre ideas of what properly meant. She was extremely religious and read the boys every afternoon from the Bible, and preferably she chose verses from the Old Testament, which oftentimes dealt with topics such as death, murder, and divine retribution. Even though Ed committed absolutely atrocious crimes as an adult, in a certain way, he was also a victim. When he was just a young boy, his mother made sure to isolate him and his brother from any outside influence. In order to accomplish that, the family moved to a secluded farm in Plainfield, Wisconsin. The only exception that enabled the boys to leave the farm was to attend school. This was the only place that allowed Gein to socialize with his peers. But whenever he even dared to befriend the other kids at school, Augusta punished him for it and forced him to stop it. This resulted in Gein being a shy outcast who displayed various strange mannerisms, such as seemingly random laughter. When he was back home, he had to do chores on the farm. Furthermore, Augusta told Henry and Edward that the world was an immoral place and that all women, apart from herself of course, were naturally promiscuous and instruments of the devil. As an adult, Gein recalled that in 1945 he and his mother visited a man named Smith in order to purchase straw. But this wasn't just another regular trip. No, it was the exact opposite. Smith got infuriated by a dog, which resulted in him beating the animal to death right in front of the Geins. A woman came out of the man's house to stop him from killing the dog, and all of a sudden Augusta's blood started to boil. Not because the dog was brutally killed, but because the woman was not married to Smith, which led Augusta to call her Smith's harlot. She told Ed that the woman had no business being there, and stressed that this made her nothing more than a whore. As you can see, Ed's whole worldview and ideology was shaped and heavily influenced by his mother, who had obviously some extreme ideas about morality herself. Gein was brainwashed, and slowly he transformed himself into the monster that he is known for today. On April 1st, 1940, Gein's father died of heart failure. This meant that he and his brother Henry had to do odd jobs in order to keep their heads above the water. Both brothers worked as handymen, and Ed also used to babysit. He actually enjoyed it a lot because he had a hard time to connect to his peers and other adults due to his poor and underdeveloped social skills. It was easier for him to relate to the kids because he had more in common with them. Around that time, Henry distanced himself more and more from the family. He eventually started to date a woman and intended to move in with her. Henry started to worry about his brother's extreme attachment and dependence to their mother. This caused him to speak ill of her in front of Ed. But it didn't have the desired effect. It actually caused the quite opposite. Ed reacted with nothing less than shock, and he was deeply hurt by his brother's words. Henry insulted the love of Ed's life, which absolutely broke his heart. This caused some tension between the brothers. Their bond weakened, but Ed's affection for his mother on the other side became stronger than ever. May 16, 1944. Some consider this the day that Ed Gein killed his first victim. To this day, it is not clarified whether this is true or not. Ed and his brother Henry worked on their farm as usual. On this day, they wanted to remove the marsh vegetation on the property. They burned it down, but all of a sudden, a fire erupted and it got out of control. In midst of this chaos, Henry apparently disappeared. Ed reported him missing, and a search party looked for Henry after the fire was extinguished. They actually found him, laying on the ground. His body was lifeless. But something was extremely bizarre. Initially, it was said that the cause of death was heart failure, since there were no signs of burning injuries whatsoever. An actual autopsy was not performed. The county colonel later said that the cause of death was asphyxiation, but the biographer Harold Schechter mentioned that Henry had bruises on his head, which begs the question, did Ed Gein kill his own brother? Did he view him as a threat to his relationship with their mother? Did Henry's insults towards Augusta flip a switch in Ed's mind that caused him to murder his own brother? Even though it's not too far-fetched to assume that Ed killed Henry, it still remains a mystery whether it's actually true or not. Augusta suffered a paralyzing stroke shortly after her son Henry died. This meant that Ed had to spend more time with his mother and that he had to take care of her. Their bond became stronger, and now no one was standing between their love. But this didn't last very long. Augusta suffered a second stroke, and on December 29, 1945, she passed away. This absolutely devastated Ed. His only friend and the only person that he deeply loved was now gone. He was all alone. No one was there to console him. There was nobody he could talk to. The consequences of his mother's way of raising him finally caught up with Ed, and they hit him with full force. His world was now filled with emptiness, darkness, and crippling loneliness. His disastrous situation and painful sadness consumed Ed's soul, and there was no shoulder that he could cry on. Gein held on to the farm and tried to earn a living by doing various odd jobs. But it was obvious that his loss of his mother also initiated the loss of his mind. He boarded up the rooms that were used by his mother. He wanted to leave everything untouched in order to preserve his mother's life, in a sense. Gein himself lived in a small room next to the kitchen. His living area became more and more squalid, which strongly indicates that he didn't care about himself anymore. His environment can be viewed as a representation of his mind. This type of neglect is like poison that robs its victim of its sanity. And around this time, Ed became increasingly interested in reading stories that covered themes like cannibalism or Nazi atrocities. And on November 16, 1957, it finally happened. Ed Gein committed his first murder that was known to the public. His victim was the local hardware store owner Bernice Warden. Gein shot her with a .22 caliber rifle. Later, he brutally mutilated her body. Bernice Warden's son Frank remembered that on the day before the crime happened, Ed Gein told Bernice that he would return the next morning in order to purchase a gallon of antifreeze. Frank informed the authorities about this information, and on the same day, Gein was arrested. His farm was searched, and what the police found was nothing less than pure horror. Bernice's decapitated body was found in a shed. Gein hung her upside down and dressed her torso out like a deer. But unfortunately, that's not all. They managed to find Bernice's head in a burlap sack, and her heart was in a plastic bag in front of Gein's potbelly stove. As horrific as it sounds, that's only a part of the entire nightmare. Inside of Gein's house were numerous female body parts that he manufactured into furniture, bowls, and even clothing. A few examples are a belt made out of female human nipples, masks made from the skin of female heads, a corset made from a female torso, leggings made from human leg skin, bowls made from human skulls, and much more. He later confessed that between 1947 and 1952, he visited local graveyards around 40 times. He elaborated that during his nocturnal visits, he was in a daze-like state. Around 30 out of those 40 times, he somehow came out of this bizarre state and just left the graveyards. The other 10 times, on the other hand, he dug up the graves of recently buried bodies. He primarily looked for middle-aged women who reminded him of his mother. Gein was so obsessed with Augusta that he tried to create a woman suit so that he could actually become his own mother. He wanted to bring his only love back to life. An existence without her was almost unbearable for Gein. He was a loner, an outcast, who desperately tried to fill the void in his soul by any means necessary. Even though Gein committed horrific crimes and mutilated the dead bodies, he actually didn't have intercourse with them. At least, that's what he told the authorities. He said that they smelled too bad, which prevented him from having sex with the bodies. In total, Gein confessed to have committed 2 murders. One of his victims was Bernice Worden. The other woman that was killed by him was Mary Hogan. In 1954, she was reported missing. When Gein's house was searched, the police found her skull in a box, along with a face mask in a paper bag. When asked about more details about this particular crime, Gein admitted to have shot Mary Hogan, but claimed that he wasn't able to recollect any more facts surrounding this case. Gein was also suspected for having committed various other unsolved crimes that occurred around that time, including the disappearance of Evelyn Hartley in 1953. During his questioning, Washoe County Sheriff Art Schley reportedly smashed Gein's head into a brick wall. It is said that Schley was extremely traumatized by Gein's crimes and that they took a huge toll on his health. In 1968, Schley died of heart failure at the young age of just 43 years old. Just an unfortunate coincidence? Maybe. But it is entirely possible and not too far-fetched that the unmeasurable trauma and stress caused Schley to suffer the heart attack which resulted in his death. So in an indirect way, Gein may have killed the Washoe County Sheriff as well. And because Art Schley assaulted Gein during the questioning, the killer's initial confession was ruled inadmissible. Gein was diagnosed with schizophrenia, which resulted in him being ruled unfit for trial. In 1968, Gein was determined to be able to stand trial. A psychiatrist testified that Gein confessed to him that he wasn't sure whether the killing of Bernice Worden happened intentionally or not. He elaborated that he examined a gun in the store and that it went off, which resulted in Worden's death. Furthermore, he mentioned that he couldn't remember anything else that happened this morning. Eventually, Ed Gein was ruled to be insane, and he spent the rest of his life in a mental hospital. On July 26, 1984, Ed Gein died at the age of 77 due to respiratory failure. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, then please consider to leave a like and to subscribe to the channel. Have a great day, and until next time.